Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Briano de 711 podcast. We're kicking off a new year. Happy New Year to everyone who is listening to this episode today. And what better way to kick off this new year with this interview where we're going to be addressing a very important topic regarding the textual criticism. If maybe I'm wrong, but I got the expert here that can correct me on this. But probably this is the most, recent, updated contribution to the topic, not in a very, getting into the weeds kind of a way, but just to give you like the lay of the land of what's going on in these fields in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. But before I jump into introducing our guest, I just want to say a few words here for Zach. Zach from What Your Pastor Didn't Tell the channel. He's doing a collaboration with us today. Zach, I just want to welcome you and thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Also, I want to say hi to my co-host, my sidekick, Matias from Russia. How you doing, my friend?
Well, it's nice here. A little cold today, though.
As usual, no surprise right there. Okay, guys, so we are honored to, to have in our midst Professor Crawford, Sidnie Crawford, and Professor Tommy Wasserman. They co-edited this book, the Oxford Handbook on the textual criticism of the Bible, covering Hebrew Bible, New Testament. So I just want to say hi today. And since we are gentlemen here, we're going to go with ladies first. Okay. So Professor Crawford, it's an honor to have you on. Thank you for being here. How are you doing
Thank
today?
you very much.
Great. Professor Wasserman joining us from Sweden.
Sweden, yes.
And as I was saying to him, this is not the first time that we have Swedish scholars. Previously, we had Professor Cecilia Wasson and Tobias Harreland joining us to talk about their scholarship. So thank you both for being here. And I think we're going to be jumping into the questions. Before we go there, I just want to ask you this. Just give us your comments, how this book came about. What was the experience like? So we can take it from there. Professor Crawford, we'll go with you first.
All right. Well, I was approached by Oxford Press by Steve Wiggins, who is the series editor for the Oxford Handbook series, which is large. I'm sure your audience has run into them before. And he asked me if I would edit a volume on textual criticism. And at first I said no. And he persisted. And so finally I agreed, but I said, I cannot do New Testament. That is just, I don't know anything about it. And so he said, well, if you can find a co-editor, that would be wonderful. So I contacted people I know in the New Testament, and they all said, Tommy Wasserman is the person you want. And so I contacted Tommy, and he agreed, and that turned out to be true. Tommy has been a great co-editor, and it's clearly one of the leading scholars in New Testament textual criticism. So I count myself lucky to have worked with him. And one of the things we had to kind of decide right from the beginning was how we would approach the volume. Some textual criticism volumes are they're simply about the practice of textual criticism and not about the theory. Others are about the theory and not about the practice. We wanted to have both in our volume for both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And so that was how we approached contacting our authors and getting them all lined up. And I have to say that we were very fortunate that so many outstanding scholars agreed to work with us. And right now, I just want to mention in particular Annalie Emilius, who was the leading scholar in Septuagint active, and she just passed away this past fall, and she will be dearly missed in the field.
Yes.
And so we feel very honored that we have the last article that she has published.
Thank you for that. Also, Wasserman, your impressions and comments about this experience as well.
Yeah. So I was, as Sidney said, at the SPL meeting. We met. I don't remember which town now at an SPL meeting, and you asked me. I think it was Jennifer Knust who mentioned me. Perhaps someone else, as you said, but it was a fine offer, and I realized, of course, that it would be a very large project to work for coming years, but it's an honor to edit such a volume, and together with Sidney White Crawford, who is a leading scholar in especially research on the Dead Sea Scrolls for decades.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I couldn't say no. How could I refuse this offer? But
Yes.
I should also say that it's wise to have like, we're not very young. We have been in these fields for a long time, so we have all these connections with colleagues. Because if you don't have these connections with leading specialists, you cannot assemble what we have done here, because we have this network of collaboration. So it's a teamwork. Okay, we're like the coaches or something in our fields, but really all of these authors, over 40, I think 42 authors of these chapters came together and did a very, very marvelous volume. Yeah. Now.
Marv, we can't hear you.
You're mute.
What about now? You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, I was just going to say that I never written a book. I don't know what's the experience like, but hats off to you scholars because of the process. You must, the process of, editing, better this than the rest of us. But it's as a token of appreciation and admiration for all what it entails, this process of writing a book. Even more so when it comes to scholarly books, which is not an easy task, I've been told. And the sole experience you guys going through these essays, editing, bringing all these people, experts, to collaborate, I think it's a one lifetime experience.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
I will not do it again.
That's right. Once in a lifetime.
Yeah. So, I'm not a scholar, but I try to, to sympathize with the human side of writing, the writing process that you go through. So, Matthias, any comments, any words so far?
Well, I want to get the book because I don't have it yet.
Yeah.
But it's very important that people actually know, especially in the Protestant evangelical sphere, about how textual criticism works and what can offer to the general public. Because, for example, Marv and I, we are from Latin America. I'm now in Russia, but the thing is, we are from that area. And the thing is that in Latin American culture, and especially in evangelical circles, we only receive, basically, we are like the dogs under the master's table that get the crumbs. Yeah. And usually we get basically second-hand scholarly works from the US.
Yes.
And it takes like literally a decade to get up to date in Latin American circles with what's going on in the US. So it's important that people in Latin America know about this, because there is a wealth of talent that cannot reach its potential among our people because they don't get access to the resources through language barrier, or simply because they don't know those resources exist. So it's very important that this work gets out.
Definitely. Zach, any comments so far before we can go jumping into the first question?
No, let's do it. Let's go into it.
Thank you. Let's do it. So the first question showing up on the screen, and it will go like this. Could you give us an overview of the disciplines of textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament as practiced in these days? Professor
Well,
Crawford. Yeah.
yes, I think as the articles in our volume make clear, textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible underwent a massive paradigm shift with the discovery and publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1950s, and then their final publication in about the turn of the century. And I think the consequences of that paradigm shift are still being felt in the field, but it became clear that the textual history of the books of the Bible is much more complicated than was previously thought. And that first of all, the Masoretic text, which tends to be the default text for Hebrew Bible scholarship, is in fact only one text among several, many really. And that in order to really get into the textual history of a biblical book, you not only have to look at the Masoretic text, but you have to look at all the manuscript evidence available from the period of the Second Temple. So that is all the Judean desert finds. In addition, you have to look at all the Septuagint evidence that's available. The Septuagint is kind of an umbrella term for Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible. And in the case of the Pentateuch, you need to look at the Samaritan Pentateuch as well. That is the canonical text of the Samaritan community. And even once you do that, you have to ask the question of, okay, how can I characterize the history of this text, and how do I talk about it or do my own scholarship in relationship to this vast array of evidence that now exists? And I think that this is something that scholars are continuing to wrestle with in this period.
Thank you, Professor Crawford. Professor Wasserman?
Yeah, I don't know where to begin, but Sidnie,
Yeah.
but Sidnie talked about the major shift with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and what that has
Yeah.
meant. We're still doing that. Okay, the Greek New Testament textual tradition and the history of the discipline is of course different in many ways, and the history of the text also. But one major, I mean, when we got the first printed New Testament in Greek, it was Erasmus in the beginning of the 16th century who wanted actually to improve the Vulgate text. And he wanted to go back to the sources, ad fontes, but he took what he could find in a few libraries. He had a handful of manuscripts, and those were all late medieval minuscule manuscripts written with cursive. He did not have access to the earlier majuscule manuscripts, which we have today, like over 300. And he did not have access to any papyrus manuscripts of this kind. This is a forgery. It's a copy, Papyrus 45. He didn't have access to any of those materials, but
Yeah.
and he did his best to publish. But then in the 19th century, things started happening for real. It was Tischendorf who was out looking for biblical manuscripts, and it was the discovery of Codex Sinaiticus in a monastery at Sinai, and he was there several times. But if you want to see these manuscripts today, the larger part is in the British Library. I saw it last year, and it had a different text. And not long thereafter, Codex Vaticanus in the Vatican Library was made known, and these had a very different text at many points compared to what Erasmus had, the minuscules. And therefore, things started happening, and especially at the turn of the century, with the work of Westcott and Hort, who showed that the majority of manuscript isn't always right against this minority of early, very important manuscripts. And the discovery of papyri from also the beginning of the 20th century, you could say, and onwards. Today, we have 141 registered papyrus manuscripts. And actually, papyrus 75, which looks like this, sorry. It turned out to have a text which is very similar to Codex Vaticanus, almost identical. And it was very different often from what Erasmus had at his disposal. So there were great shifts. Today, it's a matter of refining. We are still working through the mass of minuscule manuscripts. We have like 5,700 all in all manuscripts, witnesses to the Greek New Testament. And we refine, we try to reconstruct the whole history of the text, not only the initial text, but we're interested in the history, the whole history of the text. So this was a mini lecture, I'm sorry. That was to describe a few moments, a few important moments when we got majuscules and papyri, which changed the editions of the New Testament. So modern editions look different. Next question.
Tommy, isn't it true? I'll ask a question.
Yes.
Isn't it true that in New Testament textual criticism, the printed editions have always been critical and eclectic? They haven't been diplomatic, as in Hebrew Bible textual criticism.
Yes, you could say that to simplify, to generalize. There are some special editions with different manuscripts represented on the page, like Swanson. He published an edition in that way, but the dominating editions, as you say, they are eclectic. So scholars try to reconstruct, but we avoid the term nowadays original text. And a new term is Ausgangstext, or initial text of the New Testament.
I would like to make a question related to that final comment, because one of my professors, Maria Cariaquina, she told me that in the philosophy of textual criticism, there was like idea there was originally an original text, the original one that was penned by the author or authors. And she mentioned there was, I forgot the name, but there was a Russian scholar who actually kind of like started to question that idea. And instead of one original text, there was kind of like a tradition that was put into written form, and that gave origins to several texts, more or less at the same time, or relatively close chronologically, and those traditions ended up in the texts that were accepted as canonical. So I think that's more evident in the evidence in the Hebrew Bible for chronological reasons. Will you say that that's also applicable to the New Testament, or you find that idea convincing? All right.
I can remember, for example, the question is for me, right? You said New Testament.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, we had the problem of the very different Western text we called in Codex Besae, Cantabrigensis. It's Codex D05, with the text of Acts being 8 to 9% longer. So it looked like a really revised text, and some scholars suggested did look right two versions. But that's that hypothesis is dead, I would say. Also, we have some papyri which also have this very close to this Western text. So Codex Beza is not alone, and it's complicated, the history of that Western text. But we're still figuring that out. But another problem, you could really talk about what are we reconstructing. It's, for example, the Pauline letters. Are we reconstructing a collection of Paul's letters, which was collected early on, like perhaps in the 1st century, probably, or are we reconstructing this individual letter, for example, sent to the Corinthians or Romans and so on? That is a kind of a critical, and what is the original? Is it, the first copy, or did Paul? We don't know. Did he keep copies of his letters? Was that the foundation of a collection? Do we have like different similar texts which were then copied and multiplied? So, yeah, it is complex, and we don't talk about so often the original, but we say the initial text, which explains best the manuscript evidence and other witnesses that we have today. The hypothesis that best explains the surviving, the extant manuscripts, texts.
Okay, thank you.
We try to be humble.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to apologize for something. Maybe I was the system logged me off, and I disappeared. I don't know if you noticed that, but if you see me like moving myself, it's not like I'm not paying attention to you, but I'm multitasking. That's the word you guys. So just give me grace on that. Let's move on to the second question here, showing up on your screen. So Professor Crawford, you go first. Beside the examples shown below, what would be some other good examples wherein the textual criticism of the Bible has proved to be significant? E.g., for Q, Deuteronomy Q, this text better than us, exception the Professor Wasserman. And for Professor Wasserman, the Common Johannine, which is a famous passage, including the endings of Mark. So, Prof. Crawford, we'll go with you first.
Sure. I think the best example, and I think the one that's easiest to grasp, is in the book of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah, as your listeners will know, is a very complex book. Whether you read it in English or Spanish or Hebrew, it's a very complex book, and it's clear that it's undergone a process of editing, of growth, and we actually have 2 snapshot moments of that. The first is that has been known for a very long time, is the Septuagint translation of Jeremiah, which was about a 1/5 shorter than the Masoretic text and had a different order of chapters. The question then was, well, is it older? Is it just a later exemplar? Did the translator do this? There was, of course, a lot of arguments about this. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, what was discovered was that there were Hebrew manuscripts that were like the text of the Septuagint, and there were Hebrew manuscripts that were like the Masoretic text. And so, first of all, we can say that there were 2 different editions of Jeremiah in circulation in the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE that were both clearly considered texts of Jeremiah. The second thing we can probably say is that the Septuagint translator had a text that he translated faithfully and captures a moment in the textual history of Jeremiah where then it began its transmission in Greek. It is likewise true that for the Masoretic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts show that the Masoretic text was already in circulation in the 1st century BCE. So you have kind of snapshots in time. I think that most scholars today would say that the Greek form of Jeremiah in Hebrew is older, and that the Masoretic form of Jeremiah is a more developed form of the book. So that's simply on the basis of our textual evidence. It becomes a little more complicated when you realize that even with the oldest Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts from the 3rd century BCE, we still have a gap of centuries between when those books began to reach their shape, reach their final form, and the manuscripts that we have. So we don't anymore talk about an author, right? We don't believe that there was one author of any of the books of the Bible, but that there was a long period of growth and scribal activity that finally we can see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this kind of textual fluidity that lasted at least through the 1st century CE. And that sounds like a lecture too.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Professor Wasserman, any comments you want to support or add to this question?
Someone is barking at me. So you said you had a few examples. I mean, there are some major textual variants in the Greek New Testament, and the two most known, the ending of Mark's Gospel. There you have mainly 3 endings. One that ends after chapter 16, verse 8, for they were afraid. And actually the final word is a gar, which is very difficult. How can you end a book with a gar? Obviously, if this was the original ending of Mark, readers or some editors were not happy. How can it stop with they were afraid? So there is an intermediate ending, which is a short one. It doesn't have even a numeration of verses. And there is a long ending. The long ending is verses 9 to 20. And scholars, the majority, the consensus is that it's a later ending, the long ending. And probably based a lot on Acts and the Synoptic Gospels. That is the one of the 2 major variants. The other is the pericope of the adulterers in John's Gospel, chapter 7, verse 53 to chapter 8, verse 11. I actually wrote a book on that with my colleague Jennifer Knust to cast the first stone.
That's why I put it right there. Yeah.
The majority, the consensus is that somehow it entered John's Gospel at a later stage. And it is not in these manuscripts like Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus, which I spoke about. The first manuscript with this pericope is Codex Besae, which I mentioned before, from around 400 CE. And the pericope is not cited explicitly by the earliest church fathers either. Now you put Comma Johanneum on the screen. That's another case, which is in 1 John 5:7. And as you can see on the can the listener see this picture? Then you see something in red, and it
They
talks
can
about,
see it.
yeah.
Let me go
So
back.
now we have Dead Sea Scrolls. Can we go back? I'm a bit
Yes.
distracted. Yeah, but that is the third interesting variant, which actually that long text speaks about three witnesses in heaven, which is the Father, the Logos, and the Spirit. And then three their testimonies is one. And then we have three witnesses on earth, which is the water and spirit and the blood. So this extra little, which is highlighted in red here, it actually proves the Trinity, the Trinitarian God. The problem is that this text is not extant in it is missing from almost every manuscript. It's found just in a few late manuscripts and also in the Latin. So it's very difficult for a serious scholar to say, oh, this was in the initial text. It's out of the question. It's a very nice verse, but unfortunately, it's not part of what was in First John. So that's a bit different from the others. But there you have some of the interesting variants, and there are many more of course, in the New Testament. But the major large variants are the ending of Mark and the pericope of the adulteress. These are considered the two major interpolations in the New Testament text.
Thank you, Professor Wasserman. Now, moving on here with the Dead Sea Scrolls, Professor Crawford, what you have to say about these two texts, or I don't know what you call it.
Oh, sure. These
something on the
fragments.
screen.
They are
fragments.
fragments.
Thank
for
you.
sure. Yes. These were both very exciting discoveries in scroll scholarship. Both of them come from chapter 32 of Deuteronomy, and they probably both were just manuscripts. Well, 4Q Deuteronomy Q, we think, was just a manuscript of chapter 32. And 4Q Deuteronomy J is part of a collection of excerpts. So these kind of texts were created for study. But that is kind of beside the textual critical point, that they're certainly valid texts of these passages in Deuteronomy. 4Q Deuteronomy Q presents a text of Deuteronomy 32 that echoes the Greek text, but is not the same. And so you have a text which in the Hebrew text, you have a text in the Greek text, and you have a different text, all different, in 4Q Deuteronomy Q. And it's a pretty complicated pericope, so I'm not going to try and explain it, but just to say that it looks like 4Q Deuteronomy Q is the oldest of the three. 4Q Deuteronomy J is, I think, really easy to explain. In Deuteronomy 32:8, there is a passage that said, the Lord God divided the nations according to the sons of, and I'll just say blank. And in the Hebrew text, it said the sons of Israel, Yisrael. And in the Septuagint, it said the huios, theos, or angelon, the sons of God. And again, which was the better text? Which were they equal? Did one come from the other? But since we didn't have any Hebrew evidence for the Septuagint texts, it was maybe easier to dismiss. But then in 4Q Deuteronomy J, we see actually right here, if you can see where I'm pointing, B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, which is
Yeah.
the phrase from which the Greek was translated. So we learned that, in fact, the Greek reflects a Hebrew text that, again, was in circulation in the Second Temple period. So then the question becomes a different one for scholars. Now you have two Hebrew texts. Which one do you, the scholar, think is the older text? I actually think that maybe the oldest text was B'nai El, just sons of God in the short word for God, and that Yisrael was added and Elohim was added at some point. But that, you will get different opinions depending on scholarship. But that's a very nice example of something that the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed to us that we did not know before.
Thank you. Zach, you were about to make a question here for Professors Wasserman and Crawford. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Wasserman, earlier you spoke about how talking about an original text probably isn't the best way to talk about these biblical texts. Could you go in more detail about why you think that?
Big sigh.
Yeah. we don't
Yeah.
know. So we can talk about the autographs. The authors wrote the first copy, which is the autograph. We don't have any autographs. Okay. What do we have? We have some papyri, perhaps 6 from the 2nd century. Those are the earliest. But there is a distance. So it's a period, it's a dark. It's not too long, but it is a period which we don't have any evidence for. What happened? What survived? As I said, what about Paul? Did he collect? Was there a collection? When did the manuscript started circulating? What was copied? So, what are we reconstructing? We are reconstructing something more than an archetype. We could talk about an archetype as the manuscript which explains all the text in the manuscripts, but something less than the autograph. And therefore we have this initial text. Because, for example, if we deal with a gospel, like Gospel of Luke, for example, we look at the external evidence, the manuscripts with text of Luke, and we weigh them against each other. How good are they, these manuscripts? What kind of quality? But we also think about Luke's style, Luke's theology. But we don't have the original Luke. So it's a kind of a circular reasoning. But we have the approximate Luke. We are certain in most places what Luke wrote. All manuscripts agree. So we have a good idea of Luke's style. And with that idea, we try to reconstruct the places where there is variation. So we use both the extant manuscripts, which come from an archetype, but we also appeal to the author in a way. So we go beyond the archetype to the author, we try. But we cannot really 100% be sure that what the author wrote, of course. And we talk about the initial text, which best explains the evidence. What did that make sense? It was a bit complicated, maybe.
Yeah, no, you're right. So obviously we have manuscripts that many of them are written far away.
Yeah,
maybe hundreds of years from the actual manuscript. Some of our earliest manuscripts are just really, really small pieces of paper, right? Or paper, whatever that means. And so it's difficult to actually say like what is actually the original. So
yes.
Would you say that there, for at least a lot of these texts, there was certainly an original manuscript or thing that something like Luke or John or Paul wrote,
yes.
Or someone that writing as Luke or John or Paul or something like that?
In fact, the simplest hypothesis is that the initial text that we try to reconstruct is also the authorial text. that is the simplest hypothesis in a way. But we try to stay humble. This is like we cannot be sure. We cannot be sure on what we have now. So it would be like saying far too much that this is the original text of the New Testament, as Westcott and Hort actually called their edition. They said the Greek New Testament in the original, the New Testament in the original Greek, and it was a kind of a we don't say that any longer.
Awesome.
We
Appreciate
say
you explaining that.
We say that, for example, in the preface of the Nest-Laland 28, they talk about a working text. We're still working. We're still working out. We cannot be sure. And the UBS, the United Bible Societies edition, which is the same text, they have a ranking system to signal how confident are we in this particular variation. And they can have a D, we're very uncertain. Or an A, we're very certain. You can criticize this type of for subjective, but it can give you an idea. Okay, here we're pretty sure this has to be, the initial, which best explains the other readings. Or if you find a D reading, this is too complicated. It's very difficult.
Much appreciated.
Yeah. About the Sachs question, it's very interesting because there was some discussion about the idea of inerrancy in the scripture, and some people here in Latin America from the Reformed tradition, they argue, the Bible is inerrant but in the manuscripts, and the whole faith depends. If you find an error in the original manuscripts, it means that the Bible is not inspired. Okay, show me the manuscripts. Oh wait, those don't exist anymore. So how can you be sure that they are perfect if you don't have them? So it's a very interesting argument that some people were doing, because it's true. We cannot check if the manuscripts are perfect because we don't have them.
Yeah, would you like to respond, Sidnie?
Yes, I think that especially in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, you just have to think of the time gap between, even when you think the prophet Jeremiah, for example, was alive, right, in the 7th century BCE, and the earliest manuscripts we have in the 1st century BCE. That's a 600-year gap. It's very difficult when you're in a world of handwritten manuscripts to even think about an original text. And certainly, if you think about the Hebrew Bible, they don't have a concept of authorship in our sense. And I think that's really important. Many texts, think of Isaiah or Jeremiah, they are clearly the product of a lot of very good, intellectual, smart scribes working on this text. I mean, scholar scribes were, the PhDs of the ancient world. But it's not the ipsissima verba. And I don't think it would be honest to say that we could ever get there in Hebrew Bible scholarship.
Just to make a comment about the slide, because you throw in such interesting slides. You showed the great Isaiah scroll.
Sorry about that.
It's like over 7 meters long with text.
Let me put it back there.
Every chapter is complete, right, Sidnie?
Yes.
And actually, we chose one chunk of this.
Yeah.
Scroll
There you go.
As the cover on the cover of our book, you can see some damage here, but this was a great choice, I must say. So we're very happy about it. And Isaiah, of course, is very important also for the New Testament. Right. According to Luke, Jesus read from Isaiah. in the synagogue.
One of those interesting facts is that the 3 Old Testament books most frequently copied or quoted in the Dead Sea Scrolls are not in order, but Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Psalms. And that's also true for the New Testament, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Psalms.
Yeah.
So
can I respond to that question, the question you posed about inerrancy?
Yes, please go ahead, by all means.
So when I was when I came to faith and was a young believer, I did not reflect I hadn't reflected much about how we got the Bible. I realized, of course, it didn't fall from the sky. I knew, okay, there was the Old Testament, as we call it. The Jews say the Hebrew Bible, and it was written in Hebrew. And I understood that the New Testament was written in Greek. And I look forward to attend seminary and study theology and learn biblical languages. Very nice. And it was there also I met, when I looked at the Greek text in an edition, I also was told that there are manuscripts, and this really hooked me. But I can say that my view of scripture is, I mean, not a very, what do you say, dogmatic or fundamentalistic any longer. But you can have the center of the scripture, Jesus Christ, is shining. But in the periphery, how many authors of Isaiah or source of questions, or do we have the original text or not, or can we live with the fact that we're not sure 100% what this New Testament text looked like in the first century? We have variants which all testify together. They are witnesses to an original text which we cannot reach. What we have are manuscripts which have been transmitted by believers, whether Jewish or Christian, and it was their Bible. It was their manuscript in all its frailty. Can we live with this living tradition, and that the fact that we're not certain? Yeah, we have to do it. You cannot, but there are some people who say, oh, King James Version, that is the word of God, 100%. Very, very problematic. Very, very problematic. Because there are stuff there which doesn't exist anywhere in the manuscript, actually.
Okay, people, you heard it from here.
Well, I think it makes the whole thing more fun.
Yeah. No, I just want to quote Pete Enns, Pete Enns. I think it was in one of his books. I think it's The Sin of Certain Thing. I think it's his book.
Yeah.
And basically, Pete Enns, the everything that he went through, Westminster and everything. But I love him. I mean, this is kind of the role model that I follow, just like you were saying, Professor Wasserman. I mean, I have serious problems with inspiration, the way it's articulated nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we want to hold to any idea of inspiration, as my mentor, the Semitis, Mike Heiser, used to say, it must account for the data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what can you say before we can move on to the third question here. But what can you say about that, Professor Sidnie, about that?
Well, I think that one of the things I mean, I absolutely agree with Tommy, and I think he's put that very well. And I think I would add, this is a very theological thing, not a text critical thing, but I think that God endowed us with intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that God endowed us with intellect requires us, doesn't just allow us, but requires us to use it and to look at all the data that's available. And in any field, right? Not just, and if we put a box around anything, then we are in essence saying, oh, we understand God, right? And that's not our task, right?
Yeah.
Our task is to open ourselves to what God has to show us. And so if we block out data, we are, blocking out the kind of people that God has meant us to be.
Yeah. Mine is the next question.
Yes, Matthias, go
Okay.
ahead.
Oh yeah, about the final comment. It's very interesting when you read the New Testament, the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles and the letters of Paul, that apart from Jesus, everybody gets surprised because everybody has an expectation about what God should do. Everybody gets like, wait, this is not what I was expecting. It is very, very funny how everybody is trusting in their scriptures. They are reading them and they have a mental picture of what should happen. And every single time they get like, what is going on? This is not in my timetable or something like that. So, and we have to live with that, because if I know John the Baptist or Peter get surprised, then why will we expect that to be any different from them? So anyway, so
yeah, and also I want to add, it's very good as a scholar to be able to change your mind,
Mhm.
to
Absolutely.
reevaluate, and to be like humble. Okay,
Thank you for saying that.
you're right, I changed my mind. Yeah.
Sign me up with that.
Mhm.
Sign me up with that. Yeah. Go ahead, Matthias. Read your question, please.
Okay, question number 3. Why is there, if any, a complex relationship between literary criticism and textual criticism? And please provide some examples to better illustrate this.
So I think this is a question for me, because
Yes.
I think that the scholars have been really questioning that relationship. First of all, in 19th and early 20th century scholarship, especially coming out of Germany, there was a notion of lower criticism, which was textual criticism, where you established the correct text, and then higher criticism, where once you've established the correct text, you can ask the interesting questions, right? So the very words they chose, higher and lower, gives you some idea of the hierarchy that they assigned to these. But now we know that even as texts were still reaching their final form within this long process of centuries, right? They were also, I mean, the kind of questions we ask in literary criticism were being asked by the very people who were forming these texts. And their activity was much like our activity today. So there is no moment when, okay, you've got the text, it's frozen, now let's ask the interesting questions. It's all part of the same process. So for example, in our volume, Molly Zahn is asking that question, and she says, well, the line should just be done away with. It should be obliterated. That when you are doing exegesis, you have to ask textual questions, you have to ask literary questions, historical questions, all of those kind of questions, and then come to your conclusions, but you don't separate them out. And I think that most scholars today would agree with that. And again, if you want an example, Jeremiah is a wonderful example, right? If you want to do exegesis of Jeremiah, well, which Jeremiah are you going to choose to ask those questions of, right? We know that there were 2 versions of Jeremiah in circulation. One was not considered better than the other, right? So which one do you choose? Or do you choose to incorporate that data into the questions you're asking?
It's very interesting why how we cannot separate those, because we have probably a Western mindset that trying to get everything into boxes, which is
Yes.
not a mindset that is shared by most of people throughout history. And they wrote their texts with a different mindset. So we are like imposing our own, how do you say it? We are dissecting something alive just to give an image of something. taken into pieces something that is meant to be together.
Which is meant to be alive. That's
Alive,
right.
yeah.
It's a living tradition, not a dead one. Yes, absolutely. And I think that you put it very well. So
So, any comments, Professor Wasserman?
No, I already spoke about Pauline letters and do we reconstruct the collection or and you can see this, for example, in Romans, we have a doxology. And normally you expect a doxology at the end of what Paul is writing a letter, you know. But there are witnesses, manuscript witnesses, where the doxology is put in a different place, not in chapter 16, but in 15, is it? 14 even. And this seems to be a trace of a different, perhaps a different version of Romans with just 14 chapters. It seems like Marcion had 14 chapters, which he maybe not responsible for this particular version, that he cut off something, but he seems to be also a witness to a versions of Romans with 14 chapters, and you can see this doxology floating, which may be a sign of different versions. So here you have like textual criticism and literary criticism overlapping. But yeah, that was an example that came to my mind.
Thank you. Yeah. All right.
Also, actually, Ephesians. There is an
Okay.
ad, Ephesio. This is what we think. Okay, it's addressed to the Ephesians, but this is missing from some manuscript. Was it added? When was it? Was it removed? Rather, it's missing from some. Was it removed because to make the letter more general? The particular address and so on. Does this have to do with when you put letters together, or so we have such overlapping and interrelationship between literary and textual criticism to some degree, also in the New Testament textual tradition. Yeah.
All right. We're doing good. Let's move on here because we want to appreciate and value our guests this time. So, Matthias, this question is also yours.
Before. Okay. Please describe the paradigm shift which the textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible underwent since the discovery of the Judean desert scrolls. And that's obviously a question.
Yeah, Professor Crawford.
Yeah. Well, I already discussed this a little bit, but I think it's really important to emphasize this, that prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we essentially had three, in Western scholarship, three texts. We had the Masoretic text, which is the canonical text in Judaism. We had the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew books of the Bible, and is older, as Annalie Emilius points out in her article, than the Masoretic text as it now exists. And we also had the Samaritan Pentateuch. And scholars certainly wrestled with the relationship among those texts. But the Judean Desert Scrolls suddenly presented us with, first of all, evidence that was much, much older, going back to the 3rd century BCE. That was one major change. A second major change is that we discovered Hebrew manuscripts possessed by a Jewish community in Roman Palestine that resembled the Septuagint and resembled the Samaritan Pentateuch. So you could no longer argue that the Samaritans, well, they were just this fringe group that changed the text. No, that was clearly not the case. So the Samaritan Pentateuch had to be taken seriously as a textual witness. The same is true with the Septuagint. You could no longer argue that, well, the translator just changed something for better Greek, but it didn't reflect a Hebrew. No, that's clearly no longer true in many cases. And so the field of textual criticism kind of exploded. The other thing that changed is that because we realized that there were far older witnesses than the ones we had, it was really incorrect to talk about our manuscripts in relationship to the Masoretic text or the Samaritan Pentateuch or the Septuagint because they were later than our texts, right? It's kind of the wrong direction. Although that language still exists because it's very hard to A, to break it, and B, because those witnesses are our three complete witnesses, it makes a comparison easier. But textual scholars do admit that's the wrong direction of thinking. It's better to think of textual streams that kind of came down through antiquity, and at a certain point you have the Masoretic text, you have the Samaritan Pentateuch, you have had the Hebrew text behind the Septuagint. So it made textual criticism far more complicated. And unfortunately, sometimes scholars then kind of throw up their hands and say, well, I'm just going to use the Masoretic text. And I think that's valid if you're working within a faith community, in Judaism, for example. If you want to make an English translation for the Jewish community, you would use the Masoretic text. That's their canonical text. But if you're not working within a faith context, but just within the scholarly community that does speak to people of faith, but then that is not really a valid position to take after the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So those scrappy little manuscripts turned out to be very important.
Yeah, so we cannot say this text is Masoretic because it will be
It's
backwards.
just one text.
It was
Just one text of many.
Yeah, that's the concept. For example, I heard proto-Masoretics, that there are texts that will be in the textual tradition that will eventually become the Masoretic text.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Sidnie, can I ask you a detailed question?
Sure.
The great Isaiah scroll, there was another Isaiah text in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
There are, yes.
At least one. But is the great scroll Masoretic? Is it
No,
viewed
it's not. It's
Okay.
what's viewed as an independent text now.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
not Masoretic.
Okay. I was just curious.
That's very interesting. That's one of the difference, if I'm not mistaken, is in the prophecy about the Emmanuel, or sorry, a son is born, a child is given to us, and it will be named, or he will be called, and it's different in Dead Sea Scroll Isaiah.
There are some. I
Yeah.
think the kind of most easily graspable change occurs in Isaiah 40, when our prior evidence said, a voice said cry, and then it says a voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Now it's very clear that the original Hebrew was a voice says cry, and I said, what shall I cry? That's the prophet speaking at that point. But yes, these are differences that really do make a difference in how you understand the text.
That variant reading is interesting because John the Baptist was operating close to the Qumran, period.
Yes. And of course, now we're straying into Tommy's area, but in
Yeah.
in
That's
Matthew, where that's quoted, Matthew's quoting the Septuagint, right? And so, if John the Baptist, Matthew is referring to John the Baptist, right? And and is using the Septuagint version rather than another Hebrew version. Was that a deliberate choice on Matthew's part? This is what I don't know, but that's a question that can be asked, right?
All right, thank you.
That will be more like a comment for Dr. Wasserman about
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I cannot answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know
He's
the
never met Matthew in person, so
No.
Yeah.
But we have the
Okay.
famous, also the case of the virgin. Was it the young woman from the
Mhm. Alma.
or we specify like in the
in the
Matthew?
Septuagint.
Yeah, so
That's right.
Matthew, Matthew, uses the Greek for virgin. Yes,
Mhm.
but
I mean,
yeah.
So sorry, I just was going to say they had these licenses, right? I mean, it's something they as a writers, authors in the ancient world, it was normative. Can we say that? As to quoting one passage but giving another interpretation.
It seems to be normative for later writers to work with different versions of a book depending on what they want to accomplish. So that in a sense, exegesis tries to take meaning out of the text, but it also, you bring your preconceptions to it. So if you are working from the overarching paradigm that Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ, you will understand Hebrew Bible texts very differently from people who don't believe that. That's the simplest way to put it. And then you, as the contemporary person, you read and think about it for yourself.
That's Professor Crawford. That's pretty much the same point that Professor Mark Brettler and AJ Levine, they were on the
Yes.
podcast and they were talking about the book, reading the Bible with and without Jesus, and they severe that I mean they went to that point, like there are the Jewish tradition who they don't take Jesus as the Messiah, and they
That's right.
read their Bible, their Hebrew Bible, without that mindset. We Western, we Christians, is different, and
That's
that's
right.
okay, and that's okay. That's the point they did that.
That's right. And
Okay,
it is, and that's okay. We
yeah, that's
share a scripture, but we can't expect to share interpretation.
exactly, yeah.
Mm.
Okay,
This is also just a parenthesis, but
this is getting good. This is getting good.
This is also why I remind my students that
Sure.
the Old Testament, this designation is a Christian term. You don't say that to Jews when you speak about their Bible. It's the Hebrew Bible or Tanakh. It's not the Old Testament because we have the New Testament. This is a Christian term.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Zach, your questions are coming to the surface, so there you go.
Cool. So some might perceive the study of textual criticism of the Bible as theologically threatening. One obvious example is textual criticism, where some people might interpret that as saying, oh, we are criticizing these biblical texts. And there's other ways that people see textual criticism as a threat. Could you talk about some reasons why you don't see that as a case?
Well, I think we've been addressing that all through this conversation, right? That knowledge should never be perceived as threatening to faith. That faith should grow through knowledge, and sometimes it has to change. That doesn't mean it disappears, but it has to change as things are learned. I think that sometimes there's a difference between using the word criticism in a scholarly way and using it in a kind of colloquial way.
Yes.
You know, where, we might criticize a friend for doing something that we don't like, but criticism in scholarly terms is just using the tools of scholarship, of exegesis, to find out as much as we can about a particular text. And that's a good thing.
I want to say that people like Sidnie and myself, okay, we're experts, we're scholars, and we're doing textual criticism, and that might, make us there's a separation between scholars and all the lay people, and that might actually increase the threat in a way. Here comes the expert, and they're cutting in my Bible, they're cutting away or something. I would like to bridge that gap, and I also sometimes explain that I'm studying the manuscripts. It's very nice to talk about the manuscripts and the discoveries. That is what got me interested when I started, to hear about very exciting discoveries of old treasures, old manuscripts. That we want to hear. And these are all witnesses to the text. It is not a threat that you have two different witnesses saying two different things, but they testify in all their human frailty to the word of God, if you will. So I try to communicate this not in a kind of alienating way as an expert, but one person who is very enthusiastic and interested in these discoveries. Please study this with me. Please, do you want to do you want to learn how to read from the manuscripts? Okay, a few can do that, but we can talk about these interesting examples, and they're not threats, but they are actually exciting. I want to kind of show that this area of research is very exciting.
And if you think of all the people who copied these manuscripts, who handed them down, they were also all people of faith, and it's a witness to, the long tradition of faithful people who are interested in passing on the word of God to the next generation. That's a wonderful thing.
Can I quote a colleague also while I'm at it? I want to say this. It is because some scribes did a very good job. It is because we are able to study the scribes who didn't. You can think about this. It is because some scribes did a very good job that we were able to study those who didn't. That's a funny quote.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Let's move on here. Zach, the next one.
So what are some past and current methods in New Testament textual criticism people might not be aware of, but there's this thing called the CBGM, the coherence-based genealogical method. Could you talk about that and other methods that these textual scholars use?
Okay, so first I want to connect this to the last question, because there is a risk that some people think about methods like this, that, okay, this is a big black box. You're using computers to make your decisions. It's very dangerous. It's AI or something. This is completely misunderstanding. We are using, yes, computers and software as a tool to better control our practice of the accepted principles, actually, of textual criticism, to prefer the more difficult text, or to prefer unharmonized if there are harmonizations and so on. So we're using the CBGM to better control our decision making, and there is still the textual critic, or the team, an editorial team, who needs to work hard. So yeah, you're showing my introduction to that method, and do you want me to just in 1 minute explain what
No,
it's about?
no.
No, if you just give me a few sentences, let me take the
Sure.
example in Mark's gospel, the very first verse. This is the gospel. Here begins the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in translation. So in some manuscripts, these Greek words for Son of God are missing. And one of them is Codex Sinaiticus, which is a very old and valuable manuscript, of course. But then there are others, like a handful of late minuscules. And then, actually, as we argue when we use the coherence-based genealogical method, these late manuscripts, which also have this omission, they are actually witnesses against the short text. How can that be? If they have the short text, how can they be witnesses against the short text? It's crazy. This is because when we study their whole text, we see that they have relatives which are very close. And these relatives, they all have the long text, which means that the likelihood that these particular scribes skipped these words is very high. Do you understand? So we can say it's very likely that this is a scribal error. Scribes omitted the Son of God, very likely, in these late Byzantine manuscripts, because they're close relatives. They all have the longer. Actually, half of them, or several of them, actually were corrected afterwards, so they filled in the Son of God too. So the coherence-based genealogical method, in a nutshell, is first to just compare the texts in all places of variation and determine how far is Codex Sinaiticus, with this short text in Mark 1:1, from these Byzantine minuscules, and it's very far away, far apart. So this variant is not genealogically connected, but rather it seems that it is a scribal error, which happened in these manuscripts. This is the kind of reasoning behind the coherence-based genealogical method. I cannot explain the whole method. You have to read my introduction.
I know. No, but thank you. Thank you for just giving us the bullet points, if we can put it that way.
Something like that.
Yeah. Let's move on here to this is the seventh question. Matthias, we're about to say something.
Yeah, I think that the artificial intelligence and the use of computation they already did a big impact in biblical studies and ancient and manuscript studies, because artificial intelligence it's not only useful to cheat on your exam when you want to, but you can also analyze huge volumes of data that will be practically impossible to do by hand. And that's, for example, one of my professors, Alexander Sisikov, he's working on the text of Ben Sira, critical edition, based on the Old Church Slavonic. And they are now working in St. Petersburg and using basically artificial intelligence to get the translation of dozens and dozens and dozens of manuscripts. So it's basically the first attempt is basically a low resolution, high covering translation, because that will allow the scholars to actually analyze what the computer was doing and then find the fine details. But the computer actually do the heavy weight, the heavy work. So it's the application of the possibility of crunching a lot of data that allows the expert to do the fine detail that the machine cannot do. So that's
I agree. Basically, just want to say that the coherence-based genealogical method, that particular method, does not involve AI. But I agree in principle that the computer and the tools nowadays, they are so powerful, but you need to combine them with intelligent people. Yeah,
That's
with
right.
the
You can't just accept the answers of the computer. Remember, they can hallucinate, so we
Yeah.
don't want that.
Yep. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, on the side of Professor Crawford, I think Emmanuel Tov is a big name doing a lot of work and with computer assistance. I don't know in these days where he is at. I need to catch up. What can you tell us about that?
He's
Professor
home
Crawford?
in Jerusalem, still working, and still he, as you saw, contributed a chapter, a wonderful chapter to our volume, and we were very pleased about that. So
Great.
I think he was a pioneer in the field of using computer assisted technology in Hebrew Bible textual criticism. I think now the field has just exploded in all kinds of directions. Our chapter by Drew Longacre, who is an expert in this, I mean, even he says, okay, this is a snapshot of where we are right now, and things are moving very quickly. So that's just, who knows where things will be in 5 years. It's very difficult to tell.
And I don't know if I'm gonna be here.
That's right. None of us know how things will be in 5
Yeah.
years. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Zach, here goes your question.
Yeah. So, finally, in what ways has this work helped you acknowledge how much there's to learn from each other's fields? In other words, when you read and you help write something that involves so much information, I imagine that it could be humbling as you're learning, as you're researching, that there's just so much to learn out there. Could you talk about how much you've acknowledged that there's just so much to learn?
Well, working through this project has just given me so much respect for my colleagues who work in this field, and especially for the younger scholars who are coming up and doing such exciting work and bringing new questions that I never thought of to this project. And so I'm so happy that we have a real range of scholars at different stages of their careers to speak about these questions. I think it's a really, I think that, Tommy and I can maybe pat ourselves on the back a little bit about that we did a good job in finding our authors. So
I want to also say that, I mean, as we have said in this podcast, that the textual traditions are different, but there are also overlapping areas, and we're very happy that we have actually in part 1 after our introduction we have overarching issues like formation of canon, or one very interesting chapter is book history, new material philology, and paratextual criticism. Very interesting chapters which are relevant both for Hebrew Bible and New Testament, because there is more to it than the abstract biblical text. We have like headings, we have layout, and many other paratexts. So what can we learn from studying those paratexts? Also, we have actually in each section here how to teach, teaching textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible or the Greek New Testament. How do we teach textual criticism as a discipline? This is rather unique for this handbook. I think I have never seen that in any other handbook. So thanks to our cooperation to bring this together in one volume, we have these kind of features, new features, from which we can learn together.
All right. So we got the optional question, guys. So You tell me if you want to go ahead and address it. This is the last question here. So, in general, what is the VHSS, the VHQ, NA, UBS, including the textual commentary, and its relation to textual criticism of the Bible?
Well, in Hebrew Bible textual criticism, there are two ways to approach putting out a critical edition of the text. The one that I think everybody is familiar with who learns Hebrew is the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which is actually an heir in a line of German critical texts that began in the 19th century. The immediate predecessor of BHS was BHK, Biblia Hebraica Kittel, the Kittel edition, Rudolf Kittel. And these are all diplomatic editions. That is, they take as their main text the Masoretic text, the Codex Leningradensis, and then they engage other texts through text critical notes. And the BHQ is the next iteration of the BH series, Biblica Hebraica Quinta, the fifth iteration. And it does two things that are new. It takes into account the full range of Judean desert manuscript evidence, and it provides in each fascicle a textual commentary on major issues. And I think that's very helpful, in particular for students, advanced students who are just learning how to work with the manuscript tradition. And eclectic text, on the other hand, is one that takes all the manuscript evidence into consideration and then tries to reconstruct an archetype, right? The furthest back we can go in each book. And that is controversial because for the reasons that we've already talked about. But that is what the project of the Hebrew Bible, a critical edition that's being put out by SBL Press. And I just want to say, since you've asked this question, that we have a chapter on the Hebrew University Bible Project. And unfortunately, we had a problem with their fonts that were not Unicode. So in the printed edition, when you look at the textual commentary, you'll immediately see something is very strange and not correct. And we are working to address that in the electronic edition now. But I want to apologize to Michael Siegel and the Hebrew University Bible Project for that problem, because it should not have occurred. But we're working on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Crawford. Also, that includes the section which is the expertise of Professor Wasserman, and it has to do with it's already the NA 29 already published, Professor
But
Wasserman?
no, it's
Okay.
Nestle Aland 28. Can I see your faces, please?
Yeah, go ahead. Give me just a moment here.
Can you give me
there
the? That's so much better. It's good to see people when you try to think about what to say and communicate.
Yes.
So NA, that is Nestle Aland. It began with Nestle and was continued by Aland, Kurt Aland, and then Barbara Aland, and a whole editorial team. And it is now in its 28th edition. And the parallel is the United Bible Society's Greek New Testament, which is the same text, but another approach to the thing with the textual apparatus. So you have basically Nestle Aland there are more variants cited, but those that are cited in the Greek New Testament, UBS, they are cited more fully. Yeah. But remember that this is a hand edition. It's still very limited few textual witnesses are cited, and some are bunched together with a sign like majority text. Yeah, you're showing all sorts of nice things now. I should mention that there is work now on a major edition, Editio Critica Major, which have been published for Acts, Catholic letters, Mark's Gospel, and Book of Revelation. These have come out, and these contain much more evidence. And the Nestle Aland and UBS editions are revised according to the Editio Critica Major when they are published. So that is what is happening right now. And there is also a new textual commentary, because you mentioned in the question a textual commentary. For many years, many scholars used Bruce Metzger's a textual commentary on the Greek New Testament. It has now been replaced by Hugh Houghton's textual commentary with the same name, but it's completely rewritten. This is not it, but it's a companion. Yeah, there you have it. It's a companion, which I have read in advance and given a lot of feedback to Hugh Houghton, my colleague. And it's also a work in progress. So there will be new editions of this. And I have myself worked a lot for a new Swedish translation of the New Testament. And I have written a textual commentary in Swedish, which I perhaps one day will translate. So,
actually, you posted a picture on your Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
maybe I did. Yeah. But I interact, of course, with my colleagues, and I was on a panel this year at the SBL. No, that was last year, because we have a new year now. I was on a panel review of Hugh Houghton's fine textual commentary. So I was one of the panelists for this new textual commentary, which is a great thing. That it's really needed a new textual commentary, which is modern, and yeah, I recommend it.
Great, that's a good thing. Okay, that's a good note to end on here. Guys, Zach, Matthias, I don't know if you have any final comments for this interview.
For Professor Wasserman about I haven't heard too much comments. I mean, about the Biblia Poliglota Complutense, which is the Spanish first attempt to get a textual edition of the Bible, which is very interesting. It's not very well known.
No, actually, we have a wonderful chapter here about the history of the New Testament textual criticism, and written by Jan Krantz and Anting Yi, and I think they treat this topic. And we also have one chapter about critical editions also, but I don't think they mention the polyglot. I think it's mentioned by Jan Krantz and Anting Yi. So I recommend our handbook, and actually, Mer, perhaps we can give in the comments or the presentation, we can give a discount code, because we have a discount which will give 30% off.
That's good. That's good. Sweet.
For your viewers, a special discount.
Thank you. Zach.
I appreciate you guys coming on here. Thank you so much for the conversation. And I would encourage everybody else to check out each of the different books that I've mentioned in this video. A lot of really interesting, helpful information.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, okay, on my part, I just want to say thank you, guys, Professor Crawford, Professor Wasserman, for accepting our invitation. Thank you for addressing our layman questions. We do this because we love it, because we are passionate, because we, just like the motto on the introduction of this podcast, the Latin maxima, fides quadens intellectum. I strongly believe in that. As Professor Crawford was saying, faith needs to be, we need to add intellect and search and do our our task and our duty at the best of our ability to better understand what's going on. This is traditions that we're talking about what, over 2,000, 3,000 years? It's a lot of things that happen, and scholars, you guys, are the bridge between the difficulties, the complexities of what it takes about history, tradition, texts, everything. And we try our best to bring the scholars, the authors, so that the people who has a keen interest, they can take advantage of these interviews and have a better understanding what's going on of their Bibles, their traditions, and everything related to religion. So all I can say is thank you for your time and for being here. Your final comments, please. We go with Professor.
I just want to thank you all for having us and giving us a chance to talk about our very exciting volume and the exciting work that's being done in the field. So thank you, and thank you for your excellent questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I chime in. What she said.
All right. So with that in mind, for everybody just watching this interview in a different time and moment, please help us with your your comments, everything, your questions. We just want to help and just spread the word about these interviews and about scholarship, because scholarship is not that popular. I remember Dan Wallace debating with Bob Ehrman, and the guy who was moderating the debate, he said that the fact that Ehrman made his scholarship popular, that was a miracle in and of itself. Yeah, that was a huge laugh. So scholarship is not popular, but we must find a way to make it popular. And I think with the help of social media and technology, we are doing our best to just do that. I want to thank Zach Miller from what your pastor didn't tell you to channel. Thank you for being here and for this collaboration. I hope this is not the last one. And also to Matthias from Russia. Thank you for being here. To everyone in there, until the next time, take care. Bye now.